to Heart of a Giant webinars.
All right. Well, welcome, everyone. Whoever's joining, welcome. My name is Dave Bullis. I am the author of this book, How to Get a Grip, Coping Strategies for Complicated Times. And today's webinar and workshop is really about looking for some specific coping strategies around coping with just life stressors in general. I just want to say that this workshop is brought in collaboration with Heart of a Giant and Bube Dieme, who is the originator of Heart of the Giant and a giant champion for us here as well at How to Get a Grip and at Gateway Services. So let me just jump right in and please join. And if you have any questions, please feel free to just put them in the chat. And also, what I'd love for people to do is to be thinking about a challenge that they're facing in their own lives. And maybe at the end, when we sort of go through all the things, we can, you can sort of share whatever that challenge is, and we can begin to sort of have some real world application to what we're talking about here. So just by way of disclosures, where did it go? There we go. Not only am I did write the book, but I also work at Newton Wellesley Hospital and the Cancer Center, and I also own my own private practice here in Hyde Park, Mass. So when we're talking about coping, what are we really talking about, right? What is the goal? And I think for a lot of people, the goal is really to just be more in control of the choices that they're faced with. And sometimes it's just really easy to feel out of control. So beginning to find some ways to shift that back to being more in sort of directing what you're doing. No matter what the issues are, we have some control over how we respond to it, even if we don't have any control over what happens to us. I work a lot in medical settings, and there's a real concept of people being patients and being under care and being told what to do, and then eventually going back to being a person again, where they are, as I said, trying to be more in charge of their own lives rather than being told by the medical team. What is not the goal in coping is to not have any anxiety at all about health or whatever the challenges are. Right? It's not realistic, actually, to get to a point where I have no anxiety at all about anything. That would be sort of just not possible in real terms. And also, it's not possible to just sort of totally know what to do all the time and be perfectly on top of everything. In fact, coping is really much more about not how can we prevent bad things from happening to us, but more when these things happen, what are my skills? What are my tools? What do I use to overcome that stress? So it's really understanding that it is going to happen, and we want to be realistic about how we manage that. So just as a brief kind of background, I think it's important to recognize that wellness around stress is a continuum. And we all live up in this area up on the left-hand side of the array here which I call benign innocence, which is like that feeling that we all have for as long as we can have, where nothing bad is going to happen. And until it happens, then that's where we stay. We live there, and it's really wonderful. But we also don't know that we're there until something happens. And then we sort of fall out of that range where A is, and we more on the continuum where A, B, or B and C are on the slide here. And when people are ill or going through a crisis, they can oftentimes feel like they're sliding way down here toward C, and it's really hard, and it's very much focused on the illness or the crisis. And then we kind of, as once the crisis passed, we kind of float back up toward where B is, and then eventually we get right next to that fence between the continuum and back into the A zone. But we can't get back to A because we can't believe that something bad is not going to happen to us once it has happened to us. So really recognizing that, you can be anywhere along this continuum, and the coping strategies are different depending on where you fall on that continuum in a general way. Another concept which I think is really important is just sort of what puts us to how we are organized as humans. And I think there's sort of four main parts of us. There's our physical health, which is everything to do with our body, our brains, our muscles, our heart, lung, anything else. Then there's also our mental ability, what we think about, what we know, and understand. And then there's also our emotional health, which is what people typically think about when they're thinking about coping. It's about distress or anxiety or worry or depression. And, those are obviously important. And then the top of that column is the spiritual health, which is sort of more our sense of connection with something bigger than ourselves. And just briefly, the body is the most important. It's at the bottom of the column because, of course, if the body is out of whack or sick or ill or injured, then everything else is affected by that. And it can be absolutely sort of the focus of what people are going through, especially in medical care. Less so if it's a stressor that's not related to medicine or actual physical health. But it's a very important part because that's also where we oftentimes feel a lot of our stress with upset stomach or shortness of breath or muscle pain or even weakness sometimes. Another area, the next area up is the how we think. And this is really important in terms of our knowledge, and oftentimes what we think is true affects how we feel about it, right? So if we believe that we're being chased down the street, then we get very scared, even if it turns out later that was friends of ours trying to catch up with us, and try to tell us where the actual party was, right? At first you may feel very concerned because you didn't know who was chasing you down the street. And then once you know, all of a sudden it feels less stressful. But that idea can be in and of itself stressful. And I think this is also speaks to like how we think about our memories and what we recall from the past, and also what we anticipate in the future. Our expectations are a big part of this section of us. And oftentimes people notice that they're very distracted or they have too much on their mind. So that's a real area of concern around stress. The next up is, of course, the emotional, which is, again, as I said, the typical area where people think about stress. This is anxiety. This is depression. This is worry or and I think part of it's just recognizing that all emotions that we have, depending on what we're reacting to, are a normal reaction. If we, like I said, that in that prior example, it's normal to feel anxious if we don't know who's coming down the street after us. And it's also normal to feel relieved once we figure out that they're a friend. It's also normal to have times when you feel stressed around money stress or strain, or even times when you are excited about something. That's something good. It feels good, but it takes energy. It can be a real focus sometimes. So, and also the ebb and flow of emotions, right, is oftentimes exhausting in and of itself, never mind the reasons for that. But I also just want to make sure that we're not kind of pathologizing normal worry or normal irritation or frustration. Those are not signs of weakness or you're broken. It's just more of a sign that you're reacting to something that's happening in your environment or in your life at that moment. So the spiritual health really is sort of the top of the column. And, sometimes it's a big part of people's lives and sometimes it's not. It's really, I think of it not necessarily in terms of religion, but in terms of a sense of connection to something bigger than ourselves. And sometimes that's more cultural, like we're all Red Sox fans in this, in the Boston area, or we're, very much aligned with some, kind of spiritual community or whatever. And I think the illness community, the illness journey, the stressor that we're faced with, whether it's physical illness or other things, it can reaffirm our faith in this larger connection, or it can challenge our faith, which is why I bring it up, because I think it's an area that oftentimes doesn't get talked about, and people sort of think of it as like an all or nothing thing. Either you have it or you don't. And so this is a way to recognize that it's important for us to put on the table what role faith plays in our coping strategies. So what is the coping model? The coping model, I think, has three parts. One is setting some goals. And that's literally just simply as important as if you don't know where you're going, it's hard to make any progress. So having some place to aim is really helpful, I think. Looking at barriers, things that are getting in your way. Is there anything that's stopping you from achieving those goals on a day-to-day basis? And the barriers are not to kind of get stuck on, although people often do. But I encourage people to think of those barriers as it's really a target of what we want to fix. That's what we're trying to really put our teeth into. It's if it's financial, like what can we do to help leverage our financing. If it's physical, what can we do to help with our recovery or our healing? So the barriers are just important things to think about that's what we're going to target when we think about a coping plan. And then the third element is really looking at what your strengths are. And you have many, many strengths already. I think people oftentimes forget this. They think, well, I can't do this one thing, and so therefore I can't do anything, when in fact, I can't do that one thing, but I do all these other things pretty well. And one of the major goals is thinking about how do we want to use your strengths to overcome those barriers, because that is what's going to help you achieve your goals. So you're sort of keeping it all in mind, and it's kind of a dynamic process. It changes over time. It changes depending on what the barrier is and what strengths you have available at that moment. Also, you can also add new strengths, which is, I think, a hidden talent many people have. And that is to decide, I need to learn how to do something. And then once I do, then that's a strength I can use to overcome this particular barrier. I can learn a skill that allows me to be more employable, and therefore I can get a job that I can sustain. So the coping model is really sort of just recognizing, like, we want to set some goals, look at what's stopping us, and then think about what strengths we either have already or what do we need to develop. So one of the core concepts embedded in that coping model is just recognizing that control is sort of the key issue here. I think, when people talk about illness, people think about, well, it's worse when you have more illness, if you have advanced stage disease or not, or if you have a lot of money issues or not, or you have a lot of family stress or not. And it turns out it's not so much how well people are coping doesn't really turn out to be quite so much related to the amount of the problem, but how much control we feel we have in facing up to it. And when even in hard things, if we feel like we have control, then we're much better able to manage it. So a simple way of thinking about it is really looking at, sort of, say there are tasks that are very hard, a hard task, or that's a very, very easy task. These are obviously sort of, two extremes. There's a lot in the middle, but just for the sake of argument, if we think about hard tasks, those are things that take a lot of skill, a lot of time, a lot of effort. Easy tasks are things we can do relatively without any stress at all. Then there are skills, or there are times when we feel like we have a lot of control over a situation. And then there are other times when we feel like we have very little control over that situation. And so, as you can see from this little schematic, if we have a very hard task, but we also have very high skill level, then oftentimes we love that. We feel like we're in the zone. We're just totally jamming on whatever it is we're doing. And I'm a good athlete, say, and so it's really hard to play at a very competitive level, but I'm really good, and so then I can play at that level, and that's really exciting. That's not true for me, of course, but that's okay. I mean, you get the idea. There could be things that you're a good writer, or you're a good musician, or you're a good rock climber, or fill in the blank, whatever you're good at. If it's a hard task, but you're really good at it, then you love that. And that's when you feel like you have a lot of control. The other end of the spectrum is having an easy task over which you have very little control. And I think that's more like vacation, which is to say, I'm sitting on the beach. I have no agenda. I have no need to get up and go do anything. No one's asking anything of me or expecting anything of me. And therefore, I'm just easy. It's easy go, easy task. Easy does it. Where we don't want to end up, right, is in the other two extremes, which is when we have a very hard task and very little control over that. And this is sort of that overwhelmed feeling that leads to what people talk a lot about in business or in work settings nowadays is burnout. Which is to say there's the high expectation and a low ability to meet that expectation. And therefore, that's what leads to that sense of feeling overwhelmed. And what we want to try to do, right, is to increase our level of control and or reduce the level of task difficulty. And that's something that we talk about a lot with burnout in medical settings with nurses and doctors and such. It's also the other end of the spectrum, which also seems weird, but an easy task over which we have a lot of control actually just leads to boredom. Like, you're really good at what you do and there's nothing to do. You're really smart, and then you're in a job that's kind of a dead end job. You're really talented as a musician, and you're playing with a bunch of hacks. That's idea is, it's just not pleasant to have extra talent, which you're not using. And so we want to stay out of the high control, easy task dilemma as much as we want to stay out of the low control, hard task dilemma. And really, as much as we can, have a match between how much control we have and how much difficulty there is in the task. So we want to be in the zone or we want to be on vacation. So the guiding principle that I ask people to, in my work, to ask themselves on a daily basis is really to think about asking yourselves, am I doing the best I can with what I got right now to make the most out of today? And the reason why this is important is that when you ask yourself, am I doing, you recognize you're still the one doing your life, right? You're the one making decisions. You're in charge of you. And you have always been that way and you continue to be that way. So this stressful event, whether it's a healthcare event or a financial event or a work event, a work crisis, just recognizing that you're still in charge of making the decisions about how you respond to it. You're not responsible for everybody else or what the task is or what the challenge is, but you are responsible for how you respond to it. And that is what you are doing. You get to do that. The next thing is the best you can. And you people, by and large, I think most of us do bring our A game to most challenges that we face. It's very rare that I've met someone who said so explicitly, yeah, I'm going to kind of do a half-baked job on this task. I don't really need to, maybe I'll just phone it in or whatever. Like, for the most part, if you have any sense of sort of self-respect, you want to do your best, right? So that is, I think, important to notice that doesn't change as a result of how hard the task is. You can still bring your best effort. Again, that's a reference point to what you bring rather than how it turns out or what anybody else says about it. And so these first two parts of the question are really there to highlight the fact that your core values, the things that make you who you are, do not change. They don't go away just because things are hard. They're not any less true. Even if you're sick or you're, sort of in a big hole of debt or something, you still have the ability to respond. You still have the ability to bring your best self to anything that you're doing. So I think that's important to recognize, because when it feels like your life's been sort of turned upside down by some crisis, whether it's a physical, mental, emotional, or spiritual crisis, it's important to recognize that your core values are going to be there and stand by you. That's really your bedrock, what you stand on while you're trying to face up to the rest of it. Well, the rest of it really speaks to, with what I've got part is what is different. That really speaks to the amount of energy or resources you have to bring to the problem each day. It can feel very different than what you used to feel. It can be very different day to day. It can be very different in different times of your life. And I think of it as sort of ranging from zero, which is I have nothing at all. I can't do anything. I'm basically, inert, to I have 100% of control, and just the way I've always had it. And I'm completely in charge of what I'm doing. And it's very often the case that we're not at either of those extremes. In fact, if we are, we're not really feeling a lot of stress, because if we're completely tapped out, we're, lying in bed asleep, then we don't think much about it. So this idea of recognizing that with what we've got, it kind of goes up and down. It varies a lot. And that can be because everything takes energy, everything. So, doing the work, getting up and getting going, working around the house, working on your job, all that takes energy. But so does thinking about your job. So does thinking about this problem. So is trying to problem solve or come up with new solutions. That takes energy. Emotionally, when we're having a lot of distress, the distress itself takes a lot of energy out of us. That's why you can not do much all day. But if you're feeling overwhelmed by, say, a financial crisis or a job crisis, you can be exhausted at the end of the day, even though you haven't physically, quote, done too much, unquote, but you are busy venting energy with that mental emotional process. So that's important to recognize that goes up and down. And one of the things we want to do is set our expectations for ourselves to match our energy. So if I have a high energy, 80, 90%, I want to expect myself to give 80, 90%. If I only have 50%, I want to make sure that I'm only giving 50%. If I only have 20%, then I want to recognize that all I can give is 20%. I may want to give more than 20, but if that's all I've got, we'll be best served by really recognizing that that's what I want to try to lean into. That's my goal. right now, it's just this concept of that's the only time we have control. But in the middle of a crisis, it's often the case that we think back to the past and think, oh, if only I hadn't done this, I should have done that. I shouldn't have drank all that diet soda when I was in middle school. Or if only I hadn't invested in that, pork belly scheme, or if only I hadn't gotten that job in wherever. And thinking into the past tends to bring up those regrets. Or even if there was a good time, we know we can't get back there. I wish I could go back to my teenage years when I didn't have to worry about any of this, right? And so going back in time tends to bring up that regret. Sometimes it brings up depression. Sometimes it just brings up sadness. The future is where the other time frame people go to, and that's all about worry, right? Because that's where uncertainty lives. We can't know what's going to happen or what's coming at us. And for everybody who I've met, when you think a lot into the future, it's very easy to get anxious about what might or might not happen. So that time frame of right now is important because that's really the only time we have any control. We can't change the past and we can't change the future, but we can focus on what's going on right now. And I always talk about like that. If you can touch it, like I'm touching my little pen here, you can control it. And if I can't touch it, I can't control it. It's hard to stay in this time frame because, people always talk about like, you got to be in the present moment, but the present moment keeps ending, right? And then it ends again, and then it ends again. So really recognizing like I'm going to be flowing through this time frame of now, and I may be thinking a little bit about the past, or I may be starting to think a little bit about the future, which is normal a little bit. But if you get too far stuck into one or the other, then that's when it can become difficult. And to make the most out of today, it's really the goal, right? If you answer that question, am I doing the best I can with what I got right now? That turns out to be the secret to making the most out of today. And if you do it again today, and you do it again tomorrow, and the day after that, and the day after that, that's how you make the most out of a week, and then a month, and then a year, and then a decade, and then a score of years, or whatever comes after that. But the idea, right, is just recognizing we can't predict the future. But if we can really focus on doing the best we can on any given day, and we do that every day, then when we get to the future, however long in the future that is, we will have done a pretty good job. So the other thing I think is important about this is that it's defined by you. Like you get to decide what is the most out of this day. And it's achievable because you're the one deciding what that is. You're the one who defines what it is that you want to try to do. And so I think this turns out to be the secret to long-term happiness, although that's a kind of a weird, big, vague goal. But that idea of just noticing like, this is how I get there. I really have some power to determine my future if I can just focus on making the most out of what I'm doing right now.
This episode is brought to you by the Heart of a Giant Foundation. Thanks to the generous partners and our individual donors.
So that's the guiding principle. Am I doing the best I can with what I got right now to make the most out of today? What comes out of that and what ways to think about gaining control is to think about things. I have some technique. These are some techniques. These next couple of slides are about techniques that really help give us some sort of structure or scaffolding onto which to share, to organize those thoughts. So the 3 boxes is an example of a way to sort through our worries as new information comes at us. We can get overwhelmed because we just keep taking it in and keep taking it in. It may be like your email inbox, right? Which if you just have one email inbox, and you get all this spam, it can fill up really quickly. And sometimes it's just spam and you don't really need to pay attention to it. Sometimes it's, an email from a dear friend that you want to get back to. And sometimes it's that email from the lottery saying you've won $1 million. It's probably good to get that email. But it's hard to kind of pick that one out from all the, all the other junk email that comes into our box. So 3 boxes is sort of thinking about how do I want to sort this information? And so for box number 1, these are the things you have absolute control over. You already do. You don't need any training to do this. You are already good at it. These are the things you're already doing every day. And I mention these because most people are like, yeah. So what? So I do all that stuff, but that doesn't count. And in fact, it does count. it does count that you're actually doing things. Remember, we were talking about, am I doing the best I can? Well, that's what you're doing. In box number 1, you're doing all those things. Give yourself credit for that. Box number 2 is the things you absolutely will have control over, just not today. Maybe tomorrow, maybe the day after that, maybe the day after, or the month or the week or the year after that, but not right now. So it's not a question of if you'll ever get it done. It's just a question of when. And sometimes you just need more information. You need to do more paperwork. You need to file a form. You need to apply for some job. You need to get some training. It's just not time yet, but there's some things you can do to get there. But that's your to-do list, is in box number 2. Box number 3 is the things you don't have any control over. You never did. You never will. And really, literally, nobody else does either. And I think this is important because, of course, it's tempting to think, oh, I should have those control over those things, or those are the things I just get stuck on, and I start thinking about all the things about those items that I don't have control over, and that just revs me up and keeps me in this sort of constant state of distress. I think anybody who's listening to this video right now would recognize that the 3 or 4 years of COVID that we have all had is like that we've just had this sort of terrible thing out there in the atmosphere. We didn't know where it was. We couldn't get rid of it. We didn't know when it was coming. And so there was a lot of ambient sort of stress related to that. And so we had some control over how we responded to it. We could take our own COVID tests. We could take our immunizations, or stay away from people, or just risk it. But we had some control over that. But the idea of COVID itself was really a box number 3 thing. And so, and lots of other things go in box number 3 that we are already practiced at not taking control over, like the weather, the relative win-loss rate of our favorite baseball or hockey or soccer or football team, right? So that notion of like, oh yeah, I don't get myself so stressed out about those things. Well, we want to notice that there's some things in our own personal life that also belong in box number 3. So as new information is coming at you, what you get to do is say, okay, well, what part of this problem belongs in box number 1 that I can do today? I can take care of today. What part of it belongs in box number 2 that I will get to? I just don't need to worry about it right now. And what part of it belongs in box number 3 that I just don't have any control over? So, in a healthcare setting, it's like, I have an illness, and I can make my appointments. I can return the doctor's phone call. I can get my lab work done. That's something I can do today, say, but I can't get the results back until I see my doctor. And so that's a box number 2 thing. And the fact that I have this disease or I have this condition at all is not something that I typically have a lot of control over. So I want to really focus in on those aspects of my healthcare that I do have control over. Another 3-part process is the 3 rules of life. And this is about decision making. And that is to say that every decision has some element of choice. So there are always options, that not always good options, but there are always options. Every choice has positive and negative consequences. So there's no perfect choice. And that's important to notice. And then at some point, we're going to make a choice either way. We're either going to do the thing or we're not going to do the thing. And it's not possible to not do the thing, so to speak, if you can get that triple double negative. And the reason why I bring this up is because I think it's a lot of time people say, well, I can't decide what to do, so I'm not going to decide. And in fact, that is a decision. It's also true that people wait and say, well, once I have information, if I know how this is going to turn out, then I can't do anything. I can't make any decision until I know what the answer is going to be. But of course, life doesn't come that way. It's not like a book where you can sort of read ahead and sort of figure out what the end of the story is, and then come back and read the story to see how it got there. We oftentimes have to make decisions without perfect knowledge or understand even how it's going to turn out in the end, especially in healthcare or certain things. So recognizing that one of the ways we can prevent regret is to really recognize that I'm going to make a choice either way. And I have some power to decide what I think at this moment the upside of that decision would be versus the downside of that decision. And I can also think of, and then an alternative decision, what would be the upside of that versus the downside of that. And then I can begin to weigh out, well, the upside of this kind of decision seems to be better than the other one. And the downside seem a little less. So I'm going to go with that decision. That feels good to me. And then later, once we've made those decisions. And there's some hard parts to it, right? That's a hard day. I have to work extra late. It doesn't come as quickly as I thought it would, the solution. Then you're like, well, I'm frustrated by that. But on the other hand, I remember that I made this decision because I thought this would be the better outcome. And so I'm just going to stick with that. It does also mean that if I realize later, it's like, oh man, this was a really bad decision, I get to make another decision, which is to say, I don't want to do this anymore. But even that has positive and negative consequences. So that's the 3 rules of life. The 100th birthday, again, is a little bit about perspective taking. It has a little bit to do with past and the future. People oftentimes will talk to me about regrets about their past and thinking about, if only I hadn't, like I said before, drank all that diet soda when I was in middle school, for example. That's why I have this health problem now. And I think it's important to notice that we don't want to hold on to those regrets. So one of the kind of, in terms of living our life now and moving forward, a mental exercise, which I encourage a lot of people to do, is to sort of imagine yourself at your own 100th birthday. And you can sort of look into the future and think, all right, well, what would it be like? I'm sitting on my porch in my rocking chair, surrounded by all these people in my life, my friends, my family, whoever, my neighbors. And they asked me, so Dave, what's it like to be 100 years old? Like, what's your life been like? And I'll think about that. I'll try to come up with an answer, and they'll say something like, well, what are you glad that you did? What do you wish you'd done less of? Who are the people you really were glad that you took the time to spend time with? Was there anybody who you wish you'd spent less time with? And things like that. And the issue is that if we can come up with those answers, as we imagine ourselves, as we imagine we would be saying if we were 100, we then do sort of magically get to come back in time and to today, and think, all right, well, if I don't want to have that regret then, I got to live without that regret now. And I think there was this idea came to me when I used to work as a psychologist in nursing homes. And there was an old fellow that was full of regret, and he kept talking about all the disappointments he'd had over his life. And I remember thinking, oh my God, I just so do not want to be that guy. And then the way my mind works is, well, like, he was kind of regretful about what had happened the week before, and then also the month before, and then last year he had something he wasn't happy about, and that also reminded him of things in his distant past that he was unhappy about. And it sort of became clear to me that he was regretting things in his life that were happening to him when he was my age, right? And so I thought, well, wow, if I'm his age, if I'm at the same age he was when he was having all these regrets, I want to make sure that I'm not having those regrets now in my own age. And so that sort of began to think about, well, how would I look back on this time in the future, and how would I think about how I want this to be without regret? So this is an example of ways to sort of project yourself out in the future. And then, just like in the movies, you get to come back in time and tell your present day self, hey, don't sweat that stuff. It didn't turn out to be very important, but these people, they're really important. Make sure you take time to be with them. Tightrope walking is one of my favorite. This is balancing is a key concept in coping, and it's a big part of how I think about my own life as well as the life of my clients. And that is to say that sometimes bad things happen to us, right? And we can't ignore them. We can't shake them off. We can't just pretend they're not there. And so we can sort of get out of balance. And just like those folks who walk on the high wire, like my little guy here on the screen, and they have a little pole, right, that they carry, and that they shift it back and forth depending on, which way the wind's blowing and how they're balancing and whatnot. And I sort of think about that with life, that sometimes we get tipped off balance by bad things that happen to us, and we kind of get weighed down by them. And the more we focus on them, the more out of balance we feel. And it's hard for us to make forward progress. And so but as I just said, I think you can't just ignore that. You can't ignore that bad thing and say, oh, well, yeah, sure, I've got cancer, but I don't want to pay attention to that. I need to actually pay attention to that if I want to keep going. So how can I rebalance myself if I can't let go of the heavy weight over on this downside of my balancing pole. And the idea for me is just to, one of the ways to do that is to add positive events, energy, weight, essentially, to the other end of the pole. So that if I have a bad thing happening over here, if I, in theory, could add an equal amount of a good thing on the other side, then I would be back in balance. And that's something that I think is, important to notice. Like, I have some control over bringing in these positive things. And people often will ask, like, there are these people who get through great hardship in the world. And we see just unlimited examples of hardship if we look at the national and international news. And it's, so people wonder, like, what do they have that allows them to get through it? And it turns out, when you sort of think and talk and listen to their stories, as I have over the years, that it wasn't that they ignored the negative. It's just that they also put energy into these other aspects, these positive aspects of their life, these sort of antidepressant aspects, not just the medications, but, things that are life affirming for them. And when possible, adding weight to that positive side of their balance beam made the other half seem less heavy to carry. And in the end, what we've tried to do is that as long as there's sort of a relatively equal amount between the two sides of our lives, positive and negative, we can make forward progress. We can stay on our tightrope by recognizing that we're in balance. And I think one of the things that's sort of helpful about this is that this is a great example of where balancing is a dynamic process. It's not something you just sort of do and then you finish it. Like, you graduate high school once. You don't graduate high school more than once. You can go back to college, and you can go back to college again and get another degree. But you really only do high school once, if at all. And so noticing that balancing is not like that. Balancing is a daily habit. Noticing, oh, look, I've gotten a little bit too much on that downside. I got to bring some stuff into the good side. It's weird to say, but it is true that if you had too much on the good side, you'd want to remember. And we have this happen in healthcare in a weird way, where people have a good health report after they've maybe gone through cancer treatment, and they get a good report. It's tempting to think, well, look, I don't have cancer anymore. I guess I don't have to do my doctor's appointments or take that stupid medicine anymore. I can move on with my life. Well, that's not actually a very healthy process, right? You got to keep track of it. You got to be mindful. So yes, I don't have cancer, but I do want to make sure I go to my doctor's appointments so that I can stay cancer free. So I think that notion of thinking about balance as a daily habit can be empowering, because even if I was out of balance yesterday, today I get to retry and reclaim some balance in my life. And even if I am doing great today, I still need to keep doing it tomorrow. Similarly, in a balance idea, this is about sort of how we manage our stress. And that is to say that stress is kind of like a kitchen sink, where there's water coming out of the faucet. And normally, in normal conditions, the water comes out at a normal speed. And then the drain is open and clear, and the water goes out the drain at the same normal speed that it comes out of the faucet. And if that's the truth, then the water could sort of run for, forever, right? Which should be an astronomical water bill, but it would, at least you wouldn't get any water on the floor. It wouldn't be a mess. But what is true is that there are times in our lives when the stress, like the water, comes out of the faucet like a fire hose, just comes out of it at such a high speed that no matter how open the drain is, it's just overwhelming the sink, and it all flows out of the sink and onto the floor and makes a huge mess. Contrarily, there's also times when the water comes in very slowly and drips, 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 but because the sink is closed or the drain is closed, slowly over time, the stress builds up and builds up and builds up. And eventually, just like the fire hose, it can still overflow onto the floor and make an equally big mess. So what we really want to try to do is equalize how much stress is coming into our lives. And we have some control over the faucets by, setting limits and boundaries on what we take in. what people expect of us. We can be clearer about that for ourselves. That helps reduce some of the flow coming into our coping sink. But no matter how much is coming in, we always want to make sure that we have ways of releasing that stress from our lives every day, whether it's through a physical activity like exercise or meditation or yoga, or a mental exercise like, clearing our mind and doing something pleasurable like reading a book or listening to music or playing music. Or just an emotional release. You have a good cry, or talk to a friend or a therapist or somebody who can help you process and release some of that emotional backup. And so there is not so much of a spiritual backup. So if you have a spiritual strength, this can be an option for helping you have some context for limiting what comes into your life, and also, say, going to religious services as a way of releasing some of the stress that people hold on to. So this idea of what we're trying to do is find an equal measure of how we manage our stress coming into our lives. And this sort of having two ways of managing your stress can be obviously better than just having one. So thinking about, all right, well, here are the ways in which I can limit the amount of stress coming in at me. And then no matter what those are, I want to make sure I have a daily habit of releasing my stress and the stress energy in my body, so that it doesn't build up on me. And so having both of those together allows one to sort of have a nice, even, as I said, with the balance beam idea, there's a balance between coming in and going out in our lives. So an example of that is using physical exercise as an emotional release. If you go out for a run, or you get on a spin bike, or you go out for an angry walk or a worried walk, which is to say that you think about the things that are causing all that emotional energy to get stirred up while you're doing the exercise. It could also be just Pilates, or just lifting your legs up off the floor, or lifting your legs, if you're in a chair, lifting your legs off the floor and just holding them up, or lifting your arms up and holding your arms up. Even if you don't have full control over your body, you can use whatever body part moves, because it takes energy to do it. If you're thinking about the stressful events that are causing this anxiety or this stress to churn in your body, but you're doing something physical at the same time, that can help burn off some of that energy in a healthy way and give you the strength and also the range of motion that can be useful in other ways as well. Another example is to blow out your birthday candles. Whenever you feel that tension build up in your body, some people feel it like a knot in their stomach. Some people feel like a tightness in their chest. Some people feel their shoulders and their muscles kind of tense up. They find them they call it white knuckling a thing, because you're holding on so tight. And whenever you notice that, whatever that symptom constellation is, whenever you notice it, just blow out your birthday candles. And when you blow out, what you're doing is you're expelling essentially all the stale air that gets in our lungs when we don't breathe deeply. We sort of hold that in there. And when we hold the stale air in our lungs, it actually is a trigger for anxiety, it turns out. And so that's something that we can sort of notice, and then fight against by blowing it all out. When we blow out all the stale air, automatically our body breathes in the fresh air, and it breathes in that fresh air as much as we blew out, and it's certainly as much as we need. And then that whole cascade of things that happen afterwards, where there's more oxygen that goes into the lungs, that goes in from the lungs into the red blood cells, which go all over your body. That helps with healing. That helps with nourishing your muscles. When your muscles get nourished, they tend to relax a little bit. And also the more oxygen in the blood sends a signal to the brain to open up the blood vessels, so that your heart doesn't have to pound as hard to get the blood to your head or toes or fingers. The arteries in the veins are bigger. They widen, so it's easier for your heart to pump the blood. That's all natural and normal and happens automatically with just blowing out the candles. Then your body will automatically breathe in that air, and then that sets up the cycle, right? So that idea is all you have to do is just blow out and then allow your body to breathe in. And if you want bonus points, and who doesn't want bonus points, you can focus your thinking just on the air. So pay attention to the air flowing out of your body. Pay attention to what it feels like when the air flows back in and your chest fills up and then your stomach pushes down to have that air come back out again. And when you're focusing on that little cycle of air going out and then coming back in and then going out again, what you're doing is you're actually playing on this quirk of the brain that it's easier for your brain to choose to focus on one thing than it is to try to ignore multiple other things, right? And this sort of idea when we wake up and we worry, it's like me saying, I want you to pay no attention to this hand, pay no attention to the, my hand in front of the camera, just to totally ignore that and just listen to my words. That's really impossible to do. And it's kind of obnoxious, honestly. But that's what it's like when we start to worry, that we start thinking, well, God, I can't think about this. I got to stop. I got to turn this off. And it turns out when you're trying to turn off a thought, you have to think about it to turn it off, which means you're thinking about it, which means you can't turn it off, which means you're going to have to be thinking about turning it off and you can't do it. You can sort of see where that's going to go. So on the other hand, if you're choosing to focus on this one thing, which is the air going out and the air coming in again, that's what you're thinking about. And all those other worries, they just have to fade to the background because you're focusing on one thing on purpose, something happening inside your body right now. So this is and the reason why I bring up the birthday candle thing or any candles, it doesn't matter, it doesn't have to be your birthday, is that, one, many people have experienced blowing out candles. Two, it is the most basic fundamental aspect of breathing relaxation. And anybody who's done any meditation or mindfulness work will know this. But this is the core essence of just breathing and focusing. And if you can do that, irrespective of whether you have a meditative technique or other things, this is sort of an image that is replicable and you can do it anywhere. I talk about this a lot when people are having a hard time sleeping. Is that this is a part of getting back to sleep. And certainly people can take medications to reduce anxiety, but you can't keep taking them every, hour or so. But the breathing techniques, you can do that as often as you need to. And I always joke that breathing is highly correlated with health, in the sense that people who are not breathing at all do not have good health. People who are breathing well, have better health. So try to be in that latter group if you can. So this is a very simple, silly kind of graphic of how you would draw up a coping plan. And that is to say, setting goals for yourself in each of the 4 domains of physical, mental, and emotional wellness. And then looking and thinking and being honest with yourself about like, what's getting in my way? What's stopping me? Why can't I do this? And sometimes it's things that are beyond your control. And other times it's things that are right there in your sweet spot. So thinking about what those barriers are and then what strengths do you already have that you can use to overcome those barriers? And then also, what strengths do you need to develop? Do you need to practice an exercise regimen? Do you need to practice breathing relaxation? Do you need to practice how to knit? Whatever it is. Those are the things you want to do because when you get good, you can use your strengths to overcome the barriers. And that is what's going to help you achieve your goals. One of the nice things about this idea is that you can use strengths in any one of those 4 areas to help you overcome a barrier in any of the other 4 areas. So, I have a physical goal of, running a marathon. I mean, I don't really, but one could. But the barrier is I'm completely out of shape, but I have this mental strength of being persistent and this emotional strength of being driven to overcome hardship. And so those 2 strengths together, my mental planning ability and my emotional drive are what help me overcome my physical slothness. That's not really a word, slothness, but you get the idea. So that idea of helping you kind of overcome a barrier, you can use any of your strengths, whether they're physical, mental, or emotional, or spiritual in that matter. And that's a way of really beginning to chip away and find goals that you can achieve. So in summary, coping is an active process. It's not something that you do and then put behind you. It's something you always can you can always take another chance at. It's something that you have a lot of control over in terms of how much effort you put in. You do have to base your expectations for yourself, though, on how much energy you have, how many resources you have. If you don't have a lot of resources, if you have chronic fatigue syndrome, don't expect yourself to go run the marathon. It's just not a healthy goal to seek because it's just going to make you feel exhausted and overwhelmed. So thinking about given my energy level, what are some goals that I can achieve? Even small ones kind of build some momentum. And then work with the tools you have. right? You're already good at some things. And then, you can build other goals too. And that's an action item in and of itself. And the support, sometimes your strength are your people, your family, your friends, your colleagues, sometimes your neighbors, your community. Those are all aspects of strength that we have in varying degrees, depending on who we are. But the most important thing is anyone can cope. Anyone can do this. This is not about whether, you have privilege or riches or whatever strengths. People think about, well, that person can do it because it's easy for them because they're in such a situation. Coping is something that we bring to the table ourselves in our own unique ways. And that is how we can get better. And if we have patience and we practice, then we can make it happen. So thank you. That's this quickie version of that. The gatewayccs.com is another place to go, where the book is, and there's an 8-week video series and other things. So please feel free to check that out if you have any questions.